So imagine a hostage negotiator stepping up to a barricaded building.
Okay.
They do not pick up the megaphone to ask how the hostage taker's weekend was.
Right. No time for that.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
do not offer pleasantries about the weather. They state their absolute authority, and they issue a non-negotiable demand because, well, lives are on the line and the situation is far too volatile for small talk.
Absolutely.
Welcome to Reformed Thinking. In this deep dive, we are looking at the historical and textual context of the Apostle Paul's letter to the Galatians. Specifically, we are digging into the first chapter.
And it is a heavy first chapter.
It really is. You open this text expecting a standard ancient greeting, and instead you get a theological battering ram. We are going to examine the sheer gravity of Paul's arguments regarding justification by faith alone. And we'll be pulling insights from F. Bruce's scholarly commentary on the original Greek and Hebrew texts.
Yeah, and when you look at this text through the lens of the Westminster Confession, what emerges is a staggering picture of divine sovereignty.
Spot on.
We are dealing with the core doctrines of unconditional election and grace here. I mean, Paul's entire argument hinges on the fact that he was set apart before birth. He was rescued by God from a life of violent rebellion.
Right.
So it is a definitive proof that salvation is an act of God alone, start to finish. It requires absolutely zero human cooperation or, pre-existing merit.
Yeah, and to give you, the listener, an idea of where we are heading today, we will look at Paul's aggressive opening. We'll look at his absolute shock at the Galatians' rapid theological drift.
Which happens so fast.
So fast. And we'll look at his rigorous defense of his God-given authority, plus the historical reality of his early years right after that Damascus Road encounter.
The urgency in his writing is just palpable.
It really is. Like when you read this opening in Greek, the aggression jumps off the page. Paul isn't just defending his title, he is pulling rank on the entire religious establishment.
Yeah, he really comes out swinging.
So let's start right at the beginning, verses 1 through 5. He clarifies immediately that he was not commissioned by men or through a human intermediary, but directly through Jesus Christ and God the Father.
Right, and to grasp the weight of that opening phrase, Paul, an apostle, we really have to understand the letter-writing conventions of Near Eastern antiquity.
Okay, lay that out for us.
Yeah, well, the standard formula was universally recognized. You see it in the Old Testament book of Ezra, where it says, Artaxerxes, King of Kings, to Ezra the priest, greetings.
Right, very formal.
Yeah, and you see it in the secular Roman world, too, like with Cicero writing, Marcus Cicero to Quintus his brother, health. It is a strict three-part structure, author, addressee, greeting.
Okay.
Paul adopts this structure, sure, but he drastically amplifies the first and third parts. He cannot even get through his own name without launching into a fierce defense of his credentials.
Wow.
Because he is intercepting a lie that is actively destroying the Galatian churches.
Yeah, he describes himself as an apostle from the Greek word apostolos. Now, in general Greek, an apostolos is simply someone who is sent on an errand, right?
Right, just a messenger.
But the historical commentary connects this term directly to the Hebrew concept of the shaliah. And I think the mechanics of the shaliah are crucial to understanding why Paul is so defensive here.
They absolutely are.
So how did that legal proxy operate in the first century Jewish mindset? Like, what did it mean, practically?
So the connection to the Hebrew shaliah provides the baseline for Paul's claim. In Jewish legal and religious tradition, specifically recorded in the Mishnah, there is a binding legal principle.
Okay.
It states that a man's delegate is like himself.
A man's delegate is like him.
Yes. Keep in mind, this was an era before instant communication. No emails, no phones.
Right.
So if you sent a shaliah to conduct business or maybe arrange a marriage or deliver a ruling, that person was not just a messenger reading a script.
They weren't just a delivery boy.
Exactly. I mean, absolutely not. They carried the full, unmitigated authority of the sender. To insult the shaliah was to legally insult the sender. To reject the shaliah was to reject the sender entirely.
Man, that carries a lot of weight.
So when Paul claims this title, he is telling the Galatians that his words carry the identical binding authority of the risen Christ. He is the authorized proxy of the King of the universe.
I look at that claim, and I have to wonder how the Galatians would react to Paul bypassing the Jerusalem leaders entirely.
It would have been shocking.
Yeah, because he specifically says he was commissioned neither by men nor through man. Think about an ambassador bypassing the local embassy, ignoring all the mid-level bureaucrats, and getting their orders directly from the head of state.
That is a massive flex.
It really is. Why did he need to make that specific distinction right out of the gate?
Well, because he is systematically dismantling a rumor that the Galatians have swallowed whole.
Okay, what was the rumor?
Some rival teachers had infiltrated Galatia, and they were claiming Paul was a second-tier fraud. Yeah, they told the Galatians, sure, Paul preached to you, but he simply got his message from the real apostles down in Jerusalem, and he watered it down to make it easier for you Gentiles to accept.
So they were calling him a compromiser.
Yes, and Paul annihilates this claim linguistically. He examines the Greek preposition idia, which means through. He states his apostleship did not come through a human intermediary.
Right.
Then he repeats that exact same preposition, idea, right before Jesus Christ and God the Father.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, grammatically, he places Jesus and God the Father on the identical divine level, completely isolated from any human agency. The commission came from the top down, with absolutely no human middleman involved.
He then adds a massive theological statement right into the greeting. He says, grace and peace to you. He takes the standard Greek greeting charis, meaning grace, and the standard Jewish greeting shalom, meaning peace, and he fuses them into a Christian context.
Brilliant.
But then in verse 4, he drops an early charismatic summary. He states that Christ gave himself for our sins to deliver us from the present evil age.
Right.
Now, this concept of the two ages is fascinating, but it requires some unpacking. How did a first-century Jew understand the present evil age versus the age to come?
Well, in the Jewish mindset of Paul's day, history was strictly divided into two distinct eras. You have the present age, which is characterized by sin, suffering, decay, and rebellion against God.
Okay.
Then you have the age to come, and that is the era of resurrection, divine justice, righteousness, and God's perfect, unopposed rule.
So that's a very stark contrast.
Very stark. You can see this dualism vividly in sectarian Jewish writings, like the Qumran literature found in the Dead Sea Scroll.
Oh, right, the Essenes.
Yeah, the Qumran community literally withdrew into the desert because they viewed the current era as the epoch of wickedness. They saw it as a time dominated by the evil figure Belial.
So they just tapped out of society entirely.
Totally. You also see it in the apocryphal book of 4th Ezra. That book describes the present world as narrow, painful, and full of dangers. The expectation was that the Messiah would arrive, violently end the present evil age, and usher in the age to come.
But Paul modifies that expectation, doesn't he? Because the physical world hasn't ended, Rome is still in charge, disease still exists, and persecution is actively happening.
Yeah, the Romans are still collecting taxes.
Right. So how can he claim that believers are delivered from the present evil edge right now?
That is the concept of realized eschatology.
Okay, define that for us.
Paul is declaring something revolutionary. He is saying that by giving himself for our sins, Christ has already inaugurated the age to come.
So they overlap.
Yes, the two ages are currently overlapping. Temporally, the physical resurrection of all things is still in the future, but spiritually, Christians share the risen life of Christ in the present moment. They are rescued from the godless zeitgeist, the spirit of the age. They have been legally and spiritually transferred into a new dominion, so they are no longer citizens of a system dominated by ethically evil forces, even though they still physically walk within it.
Man, consider the daily reality of living in that present evil age. It is an invisible system of self-reliance, status, and striving.
Oh, absolutely.
To be delivered from it means you are no longer a slave to those earthly metrics. You operate under a totally different constitution.
Right.
And this aggressive defense of his divine authority naturally explains why Paul is so hostile in the following verses. The Galatians are abandoning grace for a system of works. They are returning to the present evil age.
They are running right back into the burning building.
Yeah, which brings us to verses 6 through 10, where we notice a glaring omission in the letter's structure.
A huge omission. In virtually all of Paul's other letters, Romans, 1 Corinthians, Philippians, he follows his opening salutation with a polite thanksgiving.
Right, he usually says something nice.
Yeah, he says something to the effect of, I thank my God for you. But Galatians is the solitary exception. There is no thanksgiving. There is no praise for their faith.
Zero pleasantries.
None. Paul bypasses all the pleasantries and launches straight into the Greek word thomaso, meaning I am astonished.
I want to frame this using the Greek letter-writing conventions of the time, looking at the papyri that historians have uncovered.
Yeah, the secular examples are really helpful here.
They really are. Skipping the Thanksgiving is like sending a formal business correspondence that starts without "Dear so-and-so" or "Hope you are well," and instead begins with "I am absolutely appalled."
Yeah, it's a huge breach of etiquette.
It shows you the sheer urgency of the situation. Paul says he is astonished that they are turning so quickly to a different gospel. And the linguistic choices he makes here are incredibly precise.
They are. Paul says they are turning to a different gospel using the Greek word heteros.
Okay, what does heteros mean?
It means something of a completely different kind or nature. But then he immediately corrects himself and adds, which is not really another gospel, using the word allos, meaning another of the same kind.
Ah, so he's making a sharp distinction.
Yes. The historical commentary points out that a message demanding legal obedience is so fundamentally alien to the message of free grace that it cannot even be classified in the same category.
If not just a variation.
Right, it is no gospel at all. A message of bondage cannot be labeled good news. The rival teachers in Galatia were insisting on circumcision for the male converts.
Which was a massive deal.
It was. They were teaching that faith in Christ was not sufficient to achieve justification before God. You needed faith plus the observance of the Mosaic law.
And Paul's reaction to this faith plus equation is explosive. He places a divine curse on anyone preaching a contrary message, even if it is an angel from heaven.
He doesn't hold back at all.
No, he doesn't. The Greek word he uses is anathema. Now, we use the word anathema today to mean something we strongly dislike, but Paul is pulling from a very specific Old Testament concept here.
To grasp the severity of anathema, we really have to look at its Old Testament equivalent, the Hebrew word herem.
Okay, let's dig into herem.
In the context of ancient Israelite holy war, anything placed under the herem was irrevocably devoted to complete destruction.
Right.
Think of the historical account of Achan at the Battle of Jericho. Achan took the spoils that were placed under the ban, the herem, and the result was absolute judgment and death.
It was brutal.
It was about purging the corruption from the land to maintain holiness. So when Paul invokes the word anathema, he is calling down the highest possible divine judgment.
He's not just saying, I disagree with these guys.
No, he is saying, may the divine curse rest on them for eternity. He is demanding that this false teaching be entirely purged from the church.
Well, here is where I have to offer some pushback on behalf of a modern reader.
Sure, go ahead.
Isn't Paul overreacting just a bit? I mean, let's look at the psychology of these rival teachers for a second. They probably thought they were genuinely helping the Galatians achieve a higher tier of holiness by following the law.
They probably did think that.
Right. They weren't telling them to reject Jesus outright. They were just saying, Jesus is great, but let's also keep these ancient God-given laws. Why is this particular theological error worthy of a literal curse of eternal destruction?
That question cuts to the very core of Reformed theology.
How so?
Adding human works to Christ's grace does not supplement grace. It completely nullifies it.
It cancels it out.
Exactly. If you have to earn your salvation through law-keeping, then Christ died for nothing. The cross becomes insufficient.
Man, that's a heavy thought.
It is. Martin Luther captured Paul's logic perfectly when he wrote that anything that does not teach Christ is not apostolic, even if Peter and Paul be the teachers.
Wow, even the apostles themselves.
Yes. On the other hand, Luther said that which does teach Christ is apostolic, even if Judas, Annas, Pilate, or Herod should propound it. The message is supreme.
The message over the messenger.
Always.
Yeah.
The gospel of justification by faith alone is the absolute touchstone. Any teaching that logically implies the law is still in force also implies that the Messianic age has not dawned.
Oh, because the law belongs to the present evil age.
Right. And if the Messianic age hasn't dawned, that would mean Jesus was not the true Messiah. To teach that is to teach a fatal, soul-destroying lie, which is why Paul does not hold back.
That makes the stakes crystal clear. It is an all-or-nothing proposition. Paul then defends himself against the charge of being a men-pleaser. He says in verse 10, "Am I now seeking the approval of man or of God?"
Yeah, he takes that accusation head on.
He does. The historical context suggests that Paul's opponents were accusing him of trimming his message to suit his audience. They were whispering to the Galatians, hey, Paul preaches the strict law in Jerusalem, but when he gets around you pagan Gentiles, he drops the hard requirements like circumcision just to be popular and win converts. He is a politician.
It was a vicious accusation of inconsistency.
Yeah.
Paul's settled policy, as he writes elsewhere, was to become all things to all men for the sake of the gospel. He exercised his Christian liberty depending on the context.
Right, like adapting to the culture.
Yes. But to legalistic observers, this looked like vacillation or opportunism.
It looks shady to them.
Very much so.
Mm-hmm.
But Paul answers this charge brilliantly. He states that if he were still trying to please men, he would not be a bondslave of Christ. A slave has only one master to please.
That's a great point.
Furthermore, persuading God to accept a watered-down gospel is impossible. In ancient Greek culture, there was a prevalent idea that you could persuade or manipulate the pagan deities through flattery or sacrifices or human rhetoric.
Like bargaining with the gods.
Right. But Paul rejects that entirely. God is not persuaded by human rhetoric. Paul pleases God by remaining entirely faithful to the unvarnished gospel of sovereign grace, regardless of who it offends.
And since Paul's opponents accused him of modifying the gospel to please his audience, Paul pivots to his own life story. He uses it to prove his message came directly from God. That takes us into verses 11 through 14.
The autobiographical section.
Yeah. Paul insists his gospel is not according to man. He did not receive it from humans, nor was he taught it in a classroom setting. To prove this, he lays out his own resume. He details his former life in Judaism, which he calls eudaismos in the Greek.
And he uses some incredibly violent language to describe his past.
He really does.
Paul uses this autobiographical sketch to demonstrate that he had absolutely no natural inclination toward the Christian gospel. He says he persecuted the church of God beyond all measure and laid it waste.
Laid it waste, that sounds like a battlefield term.
It is. The Greek verb he uses for laid it waste is eportheon. This was a specific military term used for the sacking and pillaging of cities.
Oh, wow. So this wasn't just a debate for him.
No, this was not a mild academic disagreement in the synagogue. He was actively attempting to exterminate the early Christian movement.
Yeah, we know from the book of Acts that he was present and approving at the stoning of Stephen.
Right.
And that he was dragging men and women out of their homes and throwing them into prison.
Just brutal stuff. He notes that he was advancing in Judaism beyond many of his peers, operating as a zealots in Greek for his ancestral traditions.
Now, those ancestral traditions would have been the oral law, right? The halakhic traditions handed down in the Pharisaic schools, like the school of Gamaliel, where Paul was trained.
Yes, the very strict oral tradition.
He was the ultimate insider. He was a rising star in the religious establishment. To understand the magnitude of his conversion, we cannot just look at this like a career change.
Is way more than that.
It would be like a high-ranking inquisitor, actively burning dissidents at the stake to protect a holy empire, suddenly dropping his torch, walking into the flames, and declaring the dissidents were right all along. It defies all psychological and self-preserving logic.
That analogy captures the shock value perfectly.
Yeah.
And from a reformed theological standpoint, this highlights the doctrine of total depravity.
Walk us through that connection.
Well, Paul was not a seeker. He was not sitting in his study reading the Old Testament scrolls and slowly realizing Jesus was the Messiah. His mind was completely darkened to the truth. His will was entirely enslaved to his self-righteousness.
He was literally hunting them.
Yes, he was actively murdering the followers of the very God he claimed to worship. His conversion is definitive proof that salvation is an act of sovereign, intervening grace. It is not human effort or intellectual deduction.
He didn't reason his way to it.
He couldn't have. He could not have reasoned his way to the gospel because his reason was corrupted by his violent religious zeal.
Which brings up a critical question regarding human psychology. If he was so intensely immersed in the oral law and the halakhic traditions, and he believed with every fiber of his being that he was serving God by killing Christians, how could a single moment erase decades of rigorous academic and religious conditioning?
The answer is found in verse 12. Paul says he received the gospel through revelation of Jesus Christ.
A revelation.
The Greek word is apocalypsis, from which we get the English word apocalypse. It means an unveiling or a drawing back of the curtain.
So it wasn't a slow realization.
No, the Damascus Road event wasn't just a change of mind or a persuasive theological argument. It was a violent, objective confrontation with the risen Lord.
Wow.
The outward vision of Christ and the inward illumination of the Holy Spirit happened simultaneously. The religious framework Paul had built his entire life upon was instantly shattered by the glory of Christ.
Because religious zeal, when untethered from truth, can lead to the worst atrocities.
Absolutely. Paul's zeal blinded him until God sovereignly intervened and removed the scales from his eyes.
And this total inability to save himself makes the sovereign intervention of God in the next verses all the more striking. Let's look at verses 15 through 17.
Some of my favorite verses.
They are amazing. Paul states that God set him apart from my mother's womb and called him by his grace. God chose to reveal his son in Paul, specifically so Paul would preach to the Gentiles.
We need to pause and look closely at the language Paul uses here. Set apart from the womb. The historical commentary ties this phrase directly to prophetic calls in the Old Testament.
Oh, like the prophets.
Yes, specifically in Jeremiah chapter 1. God says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you a prophet to the nations."
That is almost identical language.
It is. And similarly, in Isaiah 49, the servant of the Lord says, "The Lord called me from the womb to be a light to the nations." Paul is intentionally adopting this prophetic mantle.
He knows exactly what he's saying.
He does. But even more so, this is the Reformed doctrine of unconditional election, painted in the most vivid colors imaginable.
Right.
God's plan for Paul was active long before Paul committed a single sin or a single righteous act. God decreed Paul's salvation and his apostolic mission before Paul even existed. It entirely obliterates the concept of human merit.
It completely eliminates any idea that Paul earned his position. But his immediate reaction after this calling is what I find fascinating. He specifically points out what he did not do.
Right, he lists his non-actions.
Yeah, he says he did not consult flesh and blood, and he did not go up to Jerusalem to see the existing apostles. I want to highlight that phrase, flesh and blood.
It's a great phrase.
The Greek is sarkskaihima, but it reflects the Hebrew idiom basar wadam. Rabbinical literature uses this phrase repeatedly to describe frail, mortal humanity in contrast to the eternal, omnipotent God.
So he's drawing a sharp contrast.
Exactly. Paul is stressing that he bypassed human validation. But I look at this geographic detour to Arabia, and it feels like, well, strategic self-sabotage.
Oh, sir.
Well, if I've just been drafted as the cosmic envoy for a new movement, I'm heading to the cultural hubs. I'm going to Antioch or Rome or straight to the Jerusalem headquarters to get my credentials stamped. Heading off to the Nabatean kingdom seems counterproductive. What is the mechanism behind that choice? Why Arabia?
It seems counterintuitive to our modern sensibilities, sure, but it perfectly fulfilled his new calling.
Okay, unpack that.
In the ancient world, Arabia did not mean the deep sands of the Arabian Peninsula as we think of it today. It referred to the Nabatean kingdom.
Which was where geographically?
It was ruled at that time by King Aretas I. Its capital was Petra, the famous city carved into the rock, but its territory stretched all the way up to the outskirts of Damascus.
Oh, so it was actually quite close to where he already was.
Yes. Paul went there to immediately fulfill his commission to preach to the Gentiles. There were vast populations of Gentiles, both settled merchants and nomadic Bedouins, in the Nabatean realm.
So he wasn't just hiding out.
No, he did not go to the desert for a silent, contemplative monastic retreat to read his Bible. He went to work. He immediately began acting as an apostle to the Gentiles without asking Peter or James for permission.
And he apparently made a massive amount of noise while he was working in that region.
He absolutely did. We know he wasn't just sitting quietly meditating because of a historical detail he drops later in his second letter to the Corinthians.
Oh, the basket story.
Yes, Paul mentions that the ethnarch, the local governor under King Aretas, tried to arrest him in Damascus. This forced Paul to escape by being lowered out of a window in a basket.
You do not get a royal arrest warrant from a foreign king's governor by sitting quietly in the desert.
No, you do not.
Yeah.
Paul was actively preaching the gospel, disrupting the religious and social status quo, and making powerful enemies.
And what was the political climate like right then?
To give you the political context, King Aretas V was already embroiled in massive political tension with Herod Antipas, the ruler of Galilee.
Okay.
Herod Antipas had divorced Aretas' daughter to marry Herodias.
Oh, wow, so it was personal.
Very personal. The entire region was a powder keg of political and military tension. And Paul walked right into the middle of it, preaching a new king who was superior to Caesar and Aretas.
Talk about stirring the pot. Think about the intentional isolation Paul chose. By avoiding the Jerusalem apostles, he intentionally cut himself off from the approved human channels.
He did it on purpose.
He was proving that his authority was purely divine. He operated independently for 3 whole years before he finally decided to visit the headquarters of the early church.
3 years is a long time to fly solo.
It is. That brings us to verses 18 through 24. After 3 years of ministry in the wilderness and in Damascus, Paul finally goes up to Jerusalem for 15 days. He says his specific purpose was to get to know Cephas, which is the Aramaic name for Peter.
The linguistic choice here is vital. The Greek verb used for this visit is historicai.
Historicai. That sounds like history.
It is the root of our English word history. This word means to visit for the purpose of making an inquiry or getting to know someone.
So he was interviewing him.
Basically, yes. During these 2 weeks, Paul was undoubtedly receiving the historical facts about Jesus' earthly ministry. He was getting the details of Jesus' teachings, the events of the Passion Week, the crucifixion, and the specific accounts of the post-resurrection appearances. He was fact-finding with the primary eyewitness.
But wait, if Paul claims he learned his gospel from no man, does getting historical facts from Peter contradict his earlier claim?
It's a fair question.
Yeah, because he swore he didn't receive his gospel from human beings. If he is spending 15 days taking notes from Peter, his opponents might argue that Peter was his teacher all along.
It looks like a contradiction on the surface, but it is not. The resolution lies in distinguishing between the theology of the gospel and the historical data of Jesus' life.
Okay, separate those for us.
The theological meaning of the gospel, the revelation that justification is by faith alone, apart from the works of the law, and that the Gentiles are included in God's grace without needing to become Jewish, was revealed directly to Paul by Christ on the Damascus road. He did not need Peter to explain sovereign grace to him. However, the historical data, what Jesus actually said during the Sermon on the Mount, the chronological details of the Last Supper, the sequence of the resurrection appearances, these were historical events that Peter witnessed firsthand.
So it was about corroboration.
Yes. Paul received the theology directly from heaven, but he corroborated the historical timeline with the man who lived it.
That distinction clears it up. Now, while he was there, he notes that he saw no other apostles except James, the Lord's brother. James is such a fascinating figure in early church history, and his exact biological relationship to Jesus has been a point of massive debate for centuries.
It certainly has. And looking at how church history has handled James is highly significant. There are 3 main historical views regarding who James actually was in relation to Jesus.
Let's walk through those.
First, you have the Epiphanian view, named after Epiphanius. That view argues that James was a stepbrother from a previous marriage of Joseph.
Okay, so Joseph was a widower.
Right. Then you have the Hieronymian view, formulated by Jerome. This view argues that brother actually means cousin.
And why did Jerome argue that?
He was trying to protect the doctrine of the perpetual virginity of Mary. He didn't want Mary to have had other children.
Got it. And the third view.
Finally, you have the Helvidian view. This view takes the text at face value and states that James was a uterine brother, a son born to Mary and Joseph after the birth of Jesus.
And where does Reformed theology land on this?
From a Protestant Reformed perspective, the Helvidian view is the most natural reading of the Greek text.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But regardless of the exact biological relationship, what is undisputed is the staggering shift in James's life.
The shift from skeptic to leader.
Exactly. During Jesus' earthly ministry, James and his brothers outright rejected Jesus. The Gospel of John explicitly states that his brothers did not believe in him. They thought he was out of his mind.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. Yet here, just a few years later, James is a central pillar of the Jerusalem church, carrying apostolic authority alongside Peter.
So, how does someone go from thinking their own brother is a lunatic to worshiping him as the incarnate Son of God?
Paul actually answers that specific question in 1 Corinthians 15. When he lists the chronological resurrection appearances, he specifically notes, "Then he appeared to James."
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the risen Christ sought out his skeptical brother. It is another monumental display of sovereign grace. The appearance of the resurrected Lord shattered James's unbelief, just as it shattered Paul's pharisaical pride on the Damascus road.
That is incredible.
Paul meets with these 2 men, Peter and James, who are the primary witnesses to the resurrection. He is aligning his independent Gentile mission with the historical bedrock of the Jerusalem church.
And to make sure the Galatians believe this timeline, Paul takes a solemn Roman judicial oath in verse 20. He writes, "Before God, I am telling no lie."
That's a very intense thing to write.
It is. Swearing an oath in a letter was rare and serious in the ancient world. It shows that the Galatians were being fed a specific, toxic lie.
The lie that he was a rogue student.
Yeah, that Paul was just a rogue pupil of the Jerusalem apostles who went off script and made up his own law-free religion to make his life easier among the Gentiles.
Right.
So Paul calls God as his witness to state that this timeline, this 3-year gap where he operated independently, is the absolute truth.
Following this brief 15-day visit, Paul leaves Jerusalem and goes to the territories of Syria and Cilicia.
Moving back north.
Yes. The administrative history here is helpful. Syria and eastern Cilicia have been united as a single Roman imperial province since the days of Pompey, the 1st century BC.
Okay.
Paul is sent back to his home region of Tarsus, out of the immediate spotlight of Judea. And Paul highlights a specific detail about this time. He says the Judean churches did not know him by face. They had never seen him in person.
He wasn't doing a publicity tour.
No, he was not parading around Jerusalem trying to build a following.
Well, they didn't know his face, but they certainly knew his reputation. They heard the rumors spreading from town to town. The man who used to persecute us is now preaching the faith he once tried to destroy.
That news would have spread like wildfire.
And what was their reaction? Did they glorify Paul? Did they set up statues of him or ask for his autograph? No. Paul says, they glorified God because of me.
That's the best possible outcome.
It really is. Consider the psychological reaction of the Judean Christians. The person who hunted their families, who dragged their friends into prisons to be executed, was now their greatest champion.
It's just unbelievable.
They recognized that a change this radical could not be the result of human persuasion. They didn't praise the man. They praised the God who conquered the man.
Exactly.
This highlights the absolute sovereignty of God over human hearts. God didn't just stop the persecutor. He sovereignly converted him into the chief evangelist.
It is the ultimate vindication of the theology of grace that Paul has been defending from verse 1. By demonstrating his total independence from the Jerusalem leadership, Paul proves that his gospel came directly from God. And by showing the fruit of his conversion, that it caused the persecuted Jewish believers to praise God rather than revere a man, he validates the divine authenticity of his message.
The proof is in the results.
It is. This entire autobiographical section is masterfully designed to strip away any human boasting. It lays the unshakable foundation for the dense theological arguments regarding justification by faith alone that will follow in the rest of the letter.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought to chew on today. At the very beginning of this text, Paul talks about Christ giving himself to deliver us from the present evil age.
Right, going back to verse 4.
Yeah. We often think of evil as just bad behaviors, obvious sins, or malicious actions. But if this age is a comprehensive and visible system of self-reliance, status, and attempting to earn your own righteousness through your works.
Which is what the false teachers were pushing.
Exactly. Then how much of your daily routine is unknowingly governed by the rules of this present evil age? How much of your mental energy is spent trying to build a resume of righteousness to present to God or to others, hoping you have done enough to earn approval?
That is the core issue of Galatians right there.
Yeah.
The rival teachers thought they were being holy by adding the law to grace. But Paul recognized they were dragging believers right back into the slavery of the present evil age.
They were trading freedom for chains.
Yes, they were abandoning the freedom of the age to come for the exhaustion of human effort.
So, what would it look like tomorrow morning if you operated entirely as a citizen of the age to come, relying totally on the unmerited sovereign grace of God?
It changes everything.
It really does. Think back to that hostage negotiator standing outside the barricade. Christ did not come to negotiate a truce with the present evil age. He came to shatter the barricade and demand your total release. Keep your mind fixed on the vastness of God's sovereign grace. We will see you on the next deep dive.